From an early age, I felt an unspoken disappointment from my parents. They didn't need to say it. They never did. Those distant looks, heavy sighs, rolling eyes as if I were in another universe, spoke loud and clear. They really wanted a boy. 3 years later, Mara was born, and I heard my mother say to my father, "Maybe the next one will be a boy." But the next child never came. Complications during Mara's birth put an end to their dream of the boy they had planned to raise. A dream they lost, an unattainable goal, perhaps carried over to future grandchildren. In Ohio, Mara quickly became the center of their universe. She had a magnetism, springy brown hair, a loud laugh, and an ability to draw people in, especially our parents. She would bat her bright brown eyes, and they would melt, doing anything she asked, even the smallest thing. Meanwhile, I became independent from them, realizing early on that trying to get their attention was pointless. It wasn't that they completely ignored me. My basic needs were always met. But warmth, hugs for no reason, words of encouragement, all of that was reserved for Mara. I remember it was one evening in my last year of high school. We were all sitting at the dinner table at my parents' house, and I finally gathered the courage to tell them, "I've been thinking about this for a long time, but I've finally made up my mind. I'm going to study architecture." My parents looked at each other. "Architecture?" my mother repeated, freezing with a fork in her hand. "That's a very technical field." My father nodded slowly. "Have you thought about something more feminine? Maybe a teacher or a nurse?" I gathered my courage and took a deep breath. "I've already been accepted to the architecture program at the University of Cincinnati. He said I got a partial scholarship based on my portfolio." Mara, who was still in school, laughed across the table. "I'm thinking about psychology," she said in one breath. Our parents' faces lit up. "Oh, that's wonderful, dear," my mother said, smiling affectionately. "You've always had such good intuition." When their voices died down, I silently stirred the peas on my plate. I no longer tried to win their approval. Instead, I forged my own path. The people who write WAVI. In my sophomore year of college, I met Nolan. He was a senior studying urban planning. We met in the library in the design section. I was reading my notes for a course on sustainable construction when he accidentally knocked my papers off the table. "Excuse me," he said, picking up my notes. "You're in Professor Lam's class, right? I just know you do such beautiful projects." I nodded in surprise. "Yes, that's me." He smiled warmly. "Would you like to grab a coffee sometime? We can talk about design." That coffee turned into dinners, evening classes, and weekend trips to the mountains. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen. Nolan loved me not for what I didn't have or how I compared to others, but for who I was. After graduating from college, Nolan got a job at a leading design firm in the city. We moved in together and into a charming little apartment in the city center. It wasn't perfect. The pipes rattled and the windows creaked during storms. But it was ours. We would stay up late drawing on the board, dream projects, plans for the future. When it was time for Nolan to meet my parents, I braced myself for the worst. But oddly enough, they liked him. "Nolan!" my mom exclaimed. "I'm so glad to finally meet you. Will you come over for Thanksgiving and Christmas?" My dad patted him on the back. "What kind of design experience do you have? Sarah said you're a real visionary." They started calling him son, as if they had always wanted a son. Thanks to Nolan, I learned that they had the son they never had. They bombarded him with questions about his career, his future, and even when he was going to start a family. Mara, who had finished college but couldn't find a job and was still living with her parents, sat off to the side and watched. Her face was unreadable. For the first time, I had something she didn't, and the shift in attention was palpable. The next evening, without hearing a word of the argument, Nolan made his now famous risotto and garlic bread, which has set off our finicky smoke alarm ever since. He reached across the table, took my hand, and said, "Sarah, will you marry me?" My eyes filled with tears. "Yes, Nolan. 1,000 times yes." It was disappointing to my parents, but we wanted an intimate, personal wedding. "It's your big day," my mom said. "Wouldn't it be better to do something grand?" "It's a special day," I repeated. "This is exactly what we want." We had a small ceremony in the garden with close friends and a few family members. We got married under a canopy of blooming wisteria. But when the honeymoon was over, the pressure started to mount. "We need to talk about what we're all afraid of," my mom said over Sunday dinner. "Well," she said, hopeful, "when are we going to hear some good news?" I looked at Nolan. "Right now, we're focused on our careers," I said. "We want to establish financial stability before we have children." My father shook his head. "Your mother and I had nothing, and look at us now." After that, every family gathering was accompanied by stories about friends who had become grandparents, as well as not-so-subtle hints and hints. Their expectations hung over us like storm clouds. 2 years later, after saving diligently, Nolan and I bought our first home, a small craftsman-style house with a porch and an overgrown yard. We envisioned it filled with joy, love, and someday children. But we weren't going to give up. We were patient and willing to wait until it felt right. But one day, as the whole family was gathering for dinner, Mara dropped a bombshell. "I'm pregnant," she announced, placing her hand on her stomach. "It's Garrett." Garrett was her on-again, off-again ex-boyfriend, a musician who had disappeared. Our parents seemed to ignore his unreliability. "That's wonderful news." My mom was already thinking up names and decorating the nursery. They decorated the house, took her to prenatal classes, and converted rooms into a nursery. Little Eliza changed their whole lives. Every babble, every giggle, every tooth, everything was photographed and adored. When we came to visit, I watched Nolan rock Eliza and whisper in her ear. There was a desire in his eyes that he never admitted. My mom noticed it too. "Nolan is good with children," she said. "He'll be a great father." The hint was clear. The pressure intensified. We started trying. I tracked my cycle, gave up caffeine, took prenatal vitamins, even tried yoga to calm myself. But the silence between us, the months of nothing happening, weighed on us more and more. While I sat on forums and cooked meals, Nolan spent more and more nights at my parents' house. He played with his daughter, discovered his father in himself, built cribs with Mara, babysat Eliza as if it were his calling. My mother stopped mincing words. "You have no idea how he plays with her," she said once. "It's just a shame." "We're trying, Mom," I replied softly. "Are you sure?" she asked. "You've always been so ambitious in your career." Her words hurt me more than she could have imagined. Finally, I turned to a fertility specialist. Nolan sat patiently by my side during the ultrasounds, blood tests, and everything else. I was grateful for his support, but at the time we both thought it couldn't be anything serious. Then the doctor turned to me with sympathy and said, "Sarah, the test results clearly show that you have premature ovarian failure. Your chances of getting pregnant naturally are low." My whole world seemed to collapse. I could hardly hear anything. We drove home in silence. We hardly spoke that evening. Dinner grew cold. "There are other options," Nolan finally said. "IVF, adoption. This isn't the end." I nodded, but inside I was stunned. I decided I would tell them at the next family dinner. "Mom, Dad," I said, putting down my fork, "I need to tell you something. We've been trying for over a year and I can't have children." There was an oppressive silence. My mother's face changed. Her concern gave way to something more serious. "Are you infertile?" she added, as if it were a curse. "You know what a woman is?" She stopped. "It's an empty cradle," my father muttered. My mouth went dry. Mara didn't say anything. She just rocked Eliza on her lap and smiled. "Well," she finally said, "at least now we know who the real woman in the family is." I looked at Nolan, thinking he would say something in my defense, anything, but he just stared at his plate. I got up, tears streaming down my face. I don't even remember how I got to the car. I didn't look back. I went back to the front door and drove away. That evening, I packed a small bag and left a note. "File for divorce. I'll have my lawyer contact yours." The next morning, I moved into a modest rental house on the outskirts of town. It was functional and simple, but it was mine. I closed all my social media accounts and blocked all their numbers. The divorce was quick, too. We had no children and no joint investments other than the house, and neither of us wanted to drag it out. We divided the remaining property equally. Nolan transferred the house to my name, and I later sold it to get rid of all the traumatic memories associated with it. It was a quiet end to what had seemed like a turbulent beginning. I found a job at a local firm and moved to a small suburb outside Columbus, where I tried to piece my life back together. The nights were especially difficult, not just because of the loneliness of the house, but because of the endless questions swirling around in my head in the dark. Why wasn't I good enough? Why didn't he fight for us? And what was so easy for them, just to walk away? But there was something restorative about starting over in a place where no one knew my story. I painted my new apartment in pastel colors, filled the shelves with design books and detective novels, bought a vintage record player so I could spend my evenings filling the air with music, and went for long walks. I wasn't ready for a new relationship, at least not anytime soon. But life has a way of playing with you. One Saturday morning, I was at the local farmer's market picking tomatoes when I accidentally bumped into someone while reaching for a bunch of radishes. My bags fell to the ground, spilling apples and greens. "I'm sorry," he said, bending down to help. He looked up and I saw the most beautiful blue eyes I had ever seen. "I'm Everett." I smiled, a little nervous. "Lydia." He looked at my scattered tomatoes and nodded. "Let me make it up to you. Can I at least buy you a coffee?" I hesitated. There was something about him, his calmness, his soft voice, that made me agree. Coffee turned into a walk in the park, then lunch at a small cafe nearby. He introduced himself as a high school science teacher, divorced, no children, just a dog named Kip who loved to chase birds but was afraid of puddles. In those 2 hours, I smiled more than I had in the past few months. We took our time. Everett knew I wasn't looking to get into anything serious right away, but he was my island of calm in the stormy sea of my life. He never pressured me to talk about my past. He just listened when I wanted to talk. And when I finally told him everything, about my infertility, about Nolan, about Mara, he didn't even flinch. "You're not broken," he said. "Whatever life throws at us, we'll get through it together. If the higher-ups ever decide we need to have kids, we'll figure it out. But I didn't marry your future. I love you for who you are right now." It was the most sincere thing anyone had ever said to me. 4 months later, we eloped and got married in a small courthouse in front of a few close friends, without a lavish reception or speeches, just two people who had been through suffering and were filled with a desire to build something real. About a year after the wedding, we ran into a problem. I was constantly tired. At first, I blamed it on work. Then the nausea started, first in the mornings, then at random times throughout the day. Joseph Everett joked that maybe Kip was sharing his dog treats with me. It wasn't until I nearly passed out at the garden center that he made me go to the doctor. I went reluctantly. They took my blood. Then they took it again. When the doctor came back, her face was impassive. "Mrs. Witho," she said, sitting down across from me, "congratulations, you're pregnant." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I couldn't believe it. "I don't know if that's possible," I said. "I've been diagnosed with ovarian failure. I can't have children." She smiled at me. I understand that this is rare, but not impossible. The body, you know, can sometimes surprise us. We've been monitoring you closely, but the results are clear. I left the clinic in a daze. Everett was waiting for me with Kip. When he saw my face, he stood up. "Are you okay?" I shook my head, then nodded and cried. "We're going to have a baby," I whispered. He froze, stared at me, then hugged me tightly. We didn't tell anyone about it. Only a few close friends knew. My mother's family was not allowed into this chapter of our lives. They didn't know about Everett, about our marriage, and they won't know about the baby. On a cold March morning, I met my beautiful boy. We named him Calder, after the artist who showed the world that balance can be both fragile and beautiful. He had Everett's eyes, dark hair, and the softest, quietest cry I had ever heard. When I held him in my arms for the first time, I felt neither triumph nor revenge, only peace.